are marking hexagons that go all the way up to and look at this wonderful border. Okay, so now we have come up a 1/2 inch. My channel lock is on, and now I'm simply going to go all the way across. 2, 3, work my way down. And again, I find that this metallic thread likes the coast mode when I'm going back and forth, so it doesn't come to an abrupt stop when I pause. So I get less breakage. Okay, so now we have our mirrored design, so we're making this border just a little more fancy. And a few things that I want to point out, just so you see the humanity in the quilting and hopefully can come to accept it in your own work, your imperfection, so to speak. So here, I have a little bit more space here between the hexagons and the upper than the hexagon and the lower. It's just negligible. It's like 1/8 of an inch. I do not worry about stuff like that. This is going to all have filler in it. I've decided, and then I'll put some designs in here. So that is going to look fine to the human eye once it's done. That's not going to be noticeable by anybody at all. But it's just the realization that we are all imperfect. We're not computers. And just keep that in mind as you're doing yours. Don't get too OCD on perfection, unless you want to. And the seam ripper is your friend, then that's your baby crying. Okay, so now I'm going to head down to the end. We're actually going to start our filler on the outside here. Okay, so let's begin this tutorial with going over the actual hook feather first. So with the hook feather, I start with a question mark shape that starts from the bottom up. I come up, I go into my hook, I spiral in about 1.5 times, but you can go as many times in and out as you want. After you practice it, you'll get comfortable with the look that works for you. And you can backtrack or double spine like I'm doing right now, all the way out, come back down to the bottom, and once I get to the bottom, I'm going to feather around the back of the head of the hook. When I do a hook of any shape, I always consider this as the back of the head and this as the forehead, this is the eye, this is the top of the head. So once I get my hook in shape, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to feather around and into the spiral portion of the hook. Come out, and you can use any type of feathers you want to do. I am using the humpback or my swirl back feather. Swirl back, backtrack the top, come around and do a next frond. Swing away and back, backtrack the top, curve around and in, and really stretch those feathers out. The whole point is to make these beautiful long flowing feathers. Swing away and back, backtrack the top, come around and down, swing away and back, backtrack the top, come around and down. If you want to do traditional long arm feathers, remember we backtrack into the previous feather and come around. Backtrack into the previous feather and come around. Now we'll backtrack, now that you see the motion. Backtrack in. The best way to do good backtracking is to stop trying. If your backtracking is not perfect, don't sweat it. It will kick in eventually. Now I'm going to revert back to my favorites. Back, come around, swirl back, bump the top, scoop around. Now when I start to come around into the mouth of the hook, I shrink my feathers down to about the size that's going to fit right into this space. Swing away and back, backtrack the top, and fill the space. Swing away and back, backtrack the top, stretch and fill the space. Back, bump, around and fill. 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 Now, once I get to this tip, back, bump, come around into the tip, then I go ahead and I fill in the rest of this with feathers. Now you could go ahead if you wanted to, if you don't like or it feels awkward as it does for some people to fill this in with feathers, you could, once you go into the tip, you could just do a little spiral and then backtrack your way out. But I'm going to go ahead and just throw a few more feathers right in there, and now I'm going to backtrack my way out. And down. I'm going to throw a few feathers right here to close this up. Back, bump, frond, back, bump, frond. Just like that. And now you've done your first hook feather. Now what you're going to do is you're going to practice this over and over, of course, going right back and swinging to the left. Right back, swinging to the left. Once you finish practicing this, until that feels comfortable, then you're going to go ahead and you're going to swing it to the left. And you're going to practice it that way. So you'll swing it to the left, backtrack or double spine, whatever works for you, and then do your feathers, because you need to be able to do this in all four directions, north, south, east, and west. Once you practice this a bunch and that feels comfortable, then you're going to do it upside down. So you would practice that hook upside down going off to the left, backtrack, come out, back, bump, frond, and once you practice that and get comfortable that way, then you're going to practice it swinging around and to the right, counterclockwise. And so again, you want to practice all four directions. So the original, which is this way, and then you're going to practice it the opposite way, and then you're going to practice it upside down, and upside down facing the right. And then that way you're going to be comfortable once you take this to the quilt to use the feather in all different directions, because you don't want this feather going off in one direction only. It's going to look odd. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take that and we're going to turn it into a filler. So I usually will start up in my upper left corner of my quilt, or for you on your paper, I go into my hook, spiral, backtrack or double spine or a little bit of both, whatever you're doing that day is going to work fine. Feather, and remember, really stretch those feathers out. Stretch, stretch to fill. And it just looks more elegant. Come around. And the size that you see me practicing here on paper is actually the size of the feathers that I usually suggest people practice, because then when they get comfortable with the feathers, they can practice it a bit larger. And you're automatically going to go a little larger once you get to the machine anyways. Back, bump, frond, back, bump, fill her up, frond, fill her up, stretch, bump, frond, stretch, bump, frond, stretch, bump, frond, stretch, almost gives it that conch shell shape, bump, frond, stretch, bump, frond. I'm going to go ahead and simply do a spiral there. Come around and down. Throw in a few feathers, bump, frond, go smaller, bump, frond. I'm going to backtrack down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to come out between two of the fronds and I'm going to start to echo. And when I echo a lot. I fill her up with echo. Echo, 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 echo. Actually, when I'm doing this as a filler, it is mostly echo. And that's going to fill up that space. It's also going to pop out and almost faux trapunto all of those beautiful hook feathers that you've done. Come around the side, come around. If you want to, you can go ahead, throw in a swirl, echo, and then echo that into your feather and your overall design. And that's going to give it some really wonderful movement. Swirl, echo. And remember, I have that tutorial up for the basic swirl on YouTube. Come around, and again, I keep filling with echoes. Now, as I move my way across the area that I'm doing fill in, the one thing that I want you to know is that I'll use this as a basic edge-to-edge filler, but I'll also use it as a micro filler. So when I'm doing this, either way, I want to make sure to flip my hook opposite ways as I'm moving across the quilt. So I went counterclockwise here, so my next hook is going to go clockwise. Swirl, backtrack, or double spine, whatever works for you. And now I'm going to go ahead and put my feathers in, stretch them out, stretch them out. I got an oddball shape, so I'll do a double bump feather to fill in that space so I don't have to go back there. And remember, you can also just do double bump feathers if you want to do the shape in general. You know, if that's the feather you want to use, then that's the feather you want to use. Sometimes the square feather or the double bump is just a nice feather to use. Gives it a more leafy, more organic feel. So now I'm working my way around the hook just like we do when we practice the hook. Come around. I'm going to go right into the mouth, and remember, I'm going to stretch that out to fill. Stretch it out to fill. Stretch, bump. Stretch, bump, frond. Back, bump, frond. Swirl back, bump, frond. Swirl back, bump, frond. Back, bump, hook. I'm going to throw in a spiral rather than filling feathers into there, if that's what makes it more comfortable for you. Some people prefer the spiral rather than putting feathers in there. I'm going to come back down here. Now I'm going to fill that in with more fronds as I work my way up. Back, bump, frond. Back, bump, frond. Back, bump, frond. Back, bump, frond. I'm going to come down, come out between those fronds, and now I'm going to echo this into what I already have. And this is how you're going to work across the space that you are filling up, whether it be an edge to edge or whether it be micro work. I always suggest practicing this as an edge to edge first, and then once that gets comfortable, then you're going to go ahead and use it as a micro fill. And actually, we're going to be inserting this little sample into some quilt along videos so that that way you see how to do it. So it's going to be used, of course, as a standalone tutorial, but also we'll insert it for those of you that have asked, how do I do that fill that you keep doing on some of those areas? Okay, so now this is how you do the design, and now we'll go back to the quilt and you can see how I do this on the quilt. Okay, so now we're going to go in and we're going to start our filler, and we've got our cruise on slow, and I'm just going to go in. We're going to do that filler that I just showed on the drawing. Add some feathers. This is kind of my standard go-to whenever I want to do filler. Combine swirls with feathers. I'm going to work my way all the way across with this, and then we'll come back and we'll do the bottom half, and then we'll go to the inside of the hexagons and add some wonderful effects. Sneak out between those fronds. I would like to do some echoing around there to pop those out. Get down in all those little crevices. Go back to the feathers on that hook shape. Whenever you're not sure what to do, you simply just start echoing, just like when we were drawing it out. And on that tutorial, of course, there's a print-offable slider that you can trace over to get the muscle memory, which is always a good way to build muscle memory for these fillers. Again, I'm going to work my way all the way across, and all that beautiful filler that's blending into the background is going to make that beautiful copper pop right out. Okay, so now what I've done is I've finished the fill on the outside of the hexagons, and you can see how wonderful that looks. It looks a lot more elegant than if I would have put some metallic in here, which would have been flashy and worked for some quilts, but I love this mute color of this hand dye, and so matching that color on the outside I think really makes the hexagons pop. I'm also going to go ahead and use that same color on the inside when we go to put that filler in next. But I'm going to go ahead and take you down a long shot just to kind of get a look at how that turned out with that filler around the hexagons. It just really brings them to life and makes them shine.